But so there's all that. And the only other thing I would add here is like, you use the term engineered truth, engineered money. It is fascinating to me that the depth of the order Bitcoin is able to generate, right, in terms of kind of its network security, the pristine, unamendable nature of its records, which is what also makes it really valuable, right? Like it's a history that cannot be rewritten. Mm-hmm. These things are based on Bitcoin mining. So there's like it's creating this perfect order, if you will, right? If we just say perfect order is something like a record of history that cannot be rewritten.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all time. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. Bitcoin is financial sovereignty, so why compromise when you need liquidity? Meet Debify, the Bitcoin-backed lending platform made by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Debify connects you to institutional-grade liquidity and allows you to borrow fiat or stablecoins, all while keeping your Bitcoin 100% under your control with a non-custodial 3 out of 4 multi-sig escrow solution. Get competitive rates from a global marketplace of institutional-grade lenders, with loan terms that you choose, from 1 month up to a year. There are no hidden fees and there is no rehypothecation, just pure Bitcoin-aligned lending with the highest level of transparency and security. Are you ready to unlock liquidity without ever selling a single sat? Go to debify.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to check out their current lending offers. That's debify.com/Bram.
Yes. Right, that's very orderly, can't be changed. What's another example of that? I'm not exactly sure.
I feel like they kind of tie in with each other, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say is that the we get more perfection of order, if you will, as Bitcoin mining becomes more competitive. So the difficulty adjustment goes up as more hash rate is brought online.
Yes.
And what is that doing? That is the difficulty adjustment increases the chaos that Bitcoin miners have to explore, right? They're creating hashes trying to guess the right answer to this puzzle, but the puzzle becomes larger and more difficult to solve the more hash power comes online. So it's as mining is pushed further into the chaos of the uncertainty space of trying to solve, find the right hash to solve the current iteration of the puzzle, that increases the orderliness on the other side by making it, more secure.
Yes.
Another block in the chain, yes. a more unrewritable history.
When you look at the difference between Bitcoin and crypto, is that Bitcoin starts as a valuable ledger, the system or the network, or a network of true information, 100% true, constantly verified to be true every 10 minutes. And that subsequently makes the token valuable. Whereas with crypto, it's like the other way around. It's an attempt by different teams, then it's already centralized, of course. But to empower a system, eventual system somewhere to exist with the use of a token. That's why they pitch the token and not the system. Yeah, what do you think about that?
That's a great one. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the big difference in the operative word between Bitcoin and crypto is decentralization. And that there's a lot to unpack there, right? It's sort of an obscure word. I think if you are a reader of Austrian economics or computer science, you probably have some familiarity with centralized versus decentralized networks. And the question might naturally arise, why does a decentralized network lend itself to be more conformant to truth, whereas the centralized networks tend not to be? And, I think if you even consider, well, capitalism, for instance, right, and the actual traditional form, where we're actually talking about free market capitalism. We're not talking about the crony fiat capitalism we see in the world today. That's not the case, because people are having their property rights violated left and right. It's not, to the extent people are having their private property rights violated, is the extent to which it's not a decentralized system. Decentralized would be that each individual market actor is able to make their own decisions, and they bear the consequences of those decisions in a very symmetrical way. All right. So they have rules. You can think about this in the sense of a game. When you have a game that has rules that are applied evenly to everyone and they don't change, well, that's a fair game, right? You can play, you can build a strategy. Any fair game you've ever played is this way, right? The rules don't change over time. As the old saying goes, you can't change the rules in the middle of a card game. Because once you introduce the authority to change the rules, then it's no longer a game. It degenerates into a political struggle. Like, people will basically fight over the power to make the rules, yes, because the power to make the rules is to win the power to win the game forever, basically.
Yeah.
So only in truly decentralized systems do you get this universally even application of rules. And this also gets into the word corruption, right? Corruption has an etymological origin related to the word rupture. And a rupture is when a membrane splits in two, right? That something splits the surface membrane and something comes out of it, right? People get a ruptured organ or a ruptured, muscle tissue, that something, literally the surface splits open and something spills out of it. Well, that's a separation, right? There's a separation. Something that was supposed to be held under one kind of surface membrane is now released. And so you get these two different surfaces interacting. And that is, in my opinion, the reason there's an etymological relation to the word rupture and the word corruption is because corruption is that. It's a two-tiered rule system, right? Rules for thee, not for me. This has also been called apartheid in Africa. And so when you have rules that are not applied evenly, you don't have a game anymore, right? It's very important. No, it's indispensable to a game that you have agreement on the rules and that the rules don't change. And if the rules do change, they need to change at the same time and be applied evenly to all, and they need to change not in the middle of a game. So, nature has there's kind of this decentralized game built into nature. It's like the game of evolution, right?
Yes, exactly what I was to say. Nature.
If the adaptation works, right? If it helps you succeed in reproducing, well, then that feature, whatever it may be, right? A giraffe with a longer neck, a turtle with a harder shell, whatever the thing is, that adaptation will then propagate, right? If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, discard it. This is like the algorithm of evolution. Mm-hmm. And it's the same algorithm that applies in capitalism, right? Where if a product works, as in it satisfies a consumer want better, faster, cheaper than the other options available, well, then people will buy it. People will prefer it. And this will create an incentive for producers to produce it. So you'll see that tool or technology spread. And so all of that progress, right, even in a very evolutionary biology sense or in a technology sense, they're both enabled by decentralized competition. If you introduce centralization to that, I guess in natural selection, that would be something like artificial selection, where, nature, the selection pressures introduced by nature are replaced by the selection pressures introduced by some tyrant, right? If, what's that meme where it shows the wolves like 100,000 years ago, and it says, hey, let's go get some food next to that campfire. What's the worst that could happen? And then it says 100,000 years later, and it shows these little designer dogs and party
They're
hats.
licking your feet.
Yeah. And so that is the transition from natural selection to artificial selection, right? You've gone from decentralized, decentralized fitness feature discovery to centralized fitness feature discovery, right? So you go from this like wolf that's bred to hunt and kill and survive and have certain social bonds inside of the pack, and you go to this, you turn him into like a consumer toy for humans, right? When wolves are bred to become designer dogs. So that's just kind of one angle, I guess, on how decentralization is the way of nature and how centralization tends to corrupt it and make things that are very much less robust and much less fit for survival, right? If you imagine pitting a timber wolf versus a chihuahua, you get some sense of how much better decentralization is than centralization at creating things that are robust and anti-fragile.
And when I think about our fiat money world, even this week I saw a video of some guy from the ECB talking about their CBDC, and he is saying at a press conference with his title, no, it's not going to be programmable, or no, we're not going to see identity, or no, like this. And I just tweeted like, open source everything or shut the fuck up. It's just, we have come to accept the talk, not the walk, right? It's the same as the Bank of England saying like, the gold delivery is a bit slow because, sometimes we move the bullion and there's like numbers and a computer. I don't know. I don't know if you saw that press conference, but I was watching that and I was like, wow, if people still accept that, which I think shows where we kind of are in terms of, our resistance against the flaws of fiat money by the majority, which I definitely think we are not there yet, when you still see, stuff like that still working. So, and of course, then in Bitcoin, it is all walk, no talk, right? It's the whole proof of work thing permeates true Bitcoin, and it's rules, not rulers, and you can only benefit from the value that Bitcoin can bring when you adopt or when you comply with the rules, and you comply with the rules because all the other players comply with the rules, right? Like that.
Yes.
That I find a very interesting thought. Like you're forced to follow the rules from the start, basically.
In the sense of ultimate capital T truth, ultimate reality, right? That's beyond all concept, all understanding. We can just sort of see or comprehend different aspects of it. That capital T truth is never dependent on anything whatsoever. In fact, everything is dependent on it.
Yes.
Right?
The truth just is.
The truth just is, right? So the selection pressures, to go back to the Darwinian language, just are, right? They exist, right? You either can get the food or you can't, right? Which you either will survive or you won't.
Yeah.
So those selection pressures, to use like Descartes language, like they're objectively true, right? We're subjectively trying to
you can ignore it.
Subjective. Right. Ayn Rand. You're free to ignore the consequences of reality, but you are not free to ignore. I'm sorry. You are free to ignore reality, but you are not free to ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Is what she said.
It's like you're born as a little giraffe, and you're like, I'm not going to stand up. In the middle of the
exactly.
play. Yeah.
And then by natural selection, there won't be little baby giraffes that don't stand up.
Exactly.
Right? Because those that did not survive, and therefore they didn't propagate, and therefore they don't exist. So truth is real, like it's almost, again, truth, reality, like we use these terms almost interchangeably. There is some philosophical difference, but capital T truth, ultimate reality, everything is dependent on it. And like, to give you a sense of how serious this is, when I say everything, again, we mentioned survivability obviously is dependent on it. How best do you conform yourself to what is true? That will determine your ability to survive. And, I love, on this particular point, I love Francis Bacon's quote that nature to be commanded must be obeyed.
I like that.
Actually,
yeah.
For the Wright brothers to fly, it wasn't a matter of them bending any rules or creating some independent structure. What they actually had to do was discover natural laws and then conform the technology to exploit, to take advantage of those laws, basically.
I wanted to say comply. They comply.
Right.
Yeah.
They must comply. They must obey, to use Bacon's word, with these laws so that they can accomplish their aim of flight, right? Mm-hmm. Which may seem like something that's not, people might say, oh, well, that's not natural. You used a technology to exploit the mechanism of lift to create a machine that flies, and therefore you took the two-legged ape into the sky. But there is, and you could say, okay, maybe that's the line between natural and artificial is a very interesting one philosophically we can go into later, but suffice it to say, they had to obey nature to command it in the sense of, leaving the earth and taking to the skies. Right? They had to discover that mechanism and use it according to natural laws. They didn't create a new law. They followed the rules to gain this ability of flight. So commitment to truth obviously matters for innovation. It obviously matters for evolution, as we talked about with the giraffe. Even your ability, this will probably blow some people's minds, your ability to tell a lie successfully also depends on the truth. And what I mean by that is if I tell you a lie and I say, I don't know, the sky is red, I'm actually depending on your commitment to the truth for you to believe that lie, right? If you don't have a commitment to figuring out what is true, then how could I ever assume that you're going to believe my lie, right? There has to be this assumption on my part that you are actually trying to find the truth for me to be able to kind of intervene and insert something that's not true to get you to take it up as if it were true.
Well, something can only be a lie if a truth exists, right?
Exactly. And then by way of contrast, it's like if the truth doesn't exist, then what is a lie, right? It's a misrepresentation. What's the real representation?
Yes.
So you get into these definitions of truth, like an accurate representation of reality or an accurate depiction of reality. Heidegger talked about this concept of aletheia, which is like disclosure or unconcealedness, that basically the more we could reveal of nature, the more truth we would be interacting with. And so one of the deepest, so you got this relationship between truth and independence. You could say truth is the most independent thing. It's also something that we discover, right, over time. Well, so what's a fundamental example of this? The laws of physics, right? The laws of physics are very fundamental. They govern everything. They're the rules that govern all action in space and in time. They're very independent. So far as we know, they can't be changed. They're immutable. Yet everything else depends on them, right? You literally can't do anything, observe anything without complying or being confined in the laws of physics. And so that's the reason they're so deep and they're so true, right? There's truth both in their independence and truth in their immutability, I guess, right? That it's something fundamental that doesn't change, and it's on which all other change and variation is based, basically, so far as we know. Again, so what is this? It's like a cosmic protocol in a way, right? Like this is the way things work. The speed of light is this. The terminal velocity on Earth is that. The Euler's number is this. There's like these sort of independent variables that are encoded into the structure of reality. And what's important about those is they're human out of the loop, right? I've run this thought experiment before. If you could imagine that somehow there was a device, say there's only one of these devices in the world, that allows its user to manipulate the laws of physics, right? If you could somehow gain access to this device, it would let you, I don't know, turn gravity up or turn gravity down, or, change the speed of light or these other things. You could imagine how much political strife and warfare would be engaged in over that thing, because whoever got a hold of the thing would eventually run the universe, at least the human world. Well, probably beyond the human world. They would win forever. You could never beat them, right? If they can turn off gravity, or they can turn off your metabolism or whatever, then the game of existence would end, right? Because the rules again would have been corrupted. They would be changeable, and then the whole thing would come undone.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want: Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read, and it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code BRAM to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with Stampseed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, Stampseed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from Stampseed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with Stampseed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order.
What's our aim as like humans, in that we're trying to play these games with one another in a way that's productive, but to do that, we need to try and emulate the incorruptible rules of the laws of physics, right? There's a reason the laws of physics work so well, because they're not changeable, because they're not manipulable. So what we need are similar rules in the socioeconomic domain, right? And we've tried to do this a lot of different ways. In the US Constitution, which founded the United States as a constitutional republic, we have this list. It's called the Bill of Rights, right? These are the enumerated things that government can never do no matter what, right? These are the God-given inalienable rights that no government can take away. It's not that we wrote them down and said, here's what the government gave you. We wrote them down and said, these exist. These precede, these are antecedent to all governments. Therefore, the institution of government cannot manipulate any of these things, right? The top of the list is the freedom of speech, then the right to bear arms, and so on. So that was an attempt to take human out of the loop on the rule set, right? We wanted these immutable rules. And again, this was like a derivative of the Magna Carta 500 years prior to the U.S. Constitution. The year 1215, King John signed the Magna Carta: life, liberty, inviolable property, right? So he's trying to, again, that was another attempt at creating this inviolable, incorruptible rule set that would maximize the productivity and flourishing of the society that adopted it. So we've had strides towards this, but unfortunately, writing these things down on a piece of paper just isn't enough. It isn't enough to get people to guarantee their commitment to it into the future by just putting scribbles on a piece of paper. So what do you need? You need something stronger. You need something that is incentive based, something that incentivizes people to comply with it. Which again, if we look at physics and evolution, like the failure of not complying is death.
Yes.
Right. And the end of your bloodline and like all these other really heavy consequences. Ideally, we would be able to import or piggyback on, again, Francis Bacon style, right? To use the laws of physics to our advantage, to command the laws of physics, quote unquote, we have to obey the laws of physics. So how do we command these rules in a socioeconomic way that give us incorruptible, immutable rules in, say, the social and economic spheres? Well, I think that was basically considered to be an impossible task prior to Bitcoin. It's like, how could you ever? This is one of the core differences, too, between natural sciences and social sciences. The reason you can build frameworks in natural sciences is because there are relations that are fixed and independent, right? So every time we take water to 0 degrees centigrade, it freezes. Mm-hmm. Every time we take it to 100 degrees centigrade, it boils. All right, those are fixed relations on which we can build natural sciences. There are no such fixed relations in the social domain, right? There's no word I can say to you that I will be certain you'll respond in a certain way, right? That it's all human interaction is inherently unknowable. And so therefore you have to have social sciences, which are a whole different animal. And so the ideal situation, because we have to play these games with one another, whatever they are, right? Now, and you could be super general here. You could say, okay, all human action consists of an aim, right? You're in place A, you want to go to place B, right? So there's always an aim or an objective. And it's always confined by the laws of physics or the rules of physics. So that's a game, right? You've got an objective and you've got rules. So the question is, there's a lot of games we can play with each other. We can play cooperative games that increase wealth per capita. We could play competitive games, violent games. We can go to war with each other, right? We can lie to each other. We can tell the truth to each other. There's all these different things we can do. So the question becomes, how do we get the right rules for us that will bind all of us in a way that leads us to be more productive and to be able to persistently compete over time without ever degenerating the game into a political struggle or a violent struggle, which just, again, destroys the game. And so ideally what we would do is we would import the laws of physics, at least the integrity and the immutability of the laws of physics, into the socioeconomic domain. Okay, well, what is Bitcoin? Yeah. That's what Bitcoin is, right? Bitcoin uses energy expenditure via mining to guarantee. It's also using the self-interestedness of each individual actor. So there's there's a social component that is not. It's not as hard and fast of a guarantee as water freezes at 0 degrees centigrade, but it's a pretty damn good, it's the highest level of assurance you can get in the social domain that animals will act in their own individual self-interest, right? It's kind of like the law of Darwinian self-preservation.
I feel it's like another fractal of the same thing that we talked about before. Like they're all little consequences of each other, but they work in the same way. It's like the incentives are constantly further and further aligned and cemented, and therefore it's inviting to actually follow a set of decentralized rules. Like that's pretty new.
Yes.
Would you say? Right.
Yeah. I mean,
it's scary maybe, like it's because it's so new.
Yeah, it's very new in its implementation, but I would say the principles, again, we've definitely been flirting with the principles for a longer period of time, right? Just the idea of private property, for instance, is, okay, everyone that does the work to produce the thing has the exclusive rights to enjoy the thing and the responsibility to take care of the thing. And those rights can be traded, right? Like we can trade with one another via contract.
Yeah.
And so basically the principle underneath private property is if you earned it, you keep it. If you didn't earn it, you don't keep it, right? It's like the principle of justice encoded into this socioeconomic tool. Okay, great. That's what we want. But the problem is you just have to encourage people to pretend like that is true because it's not actually true, right? If you make a sandwich,
yes,
there's not some holy law that makes you have the exclusive rights to be able to digest that sandwich, right? If I come along and I take it and I eat it, well, then I just benefited from your work at your expense. So we needed to induce people to try and follow these rules with disincentives, basically. Like if you steal from someone, you're going to get, you're going to get in trouble, basically.
Yes.
Okay, well, Bitcoin, again, sort of flips that. And it's like, no, we're going to actually incentivize you to be honest and to act in a way that is that affords mutual productivity. Again, it does this weird thing where by it's just an abstraction, it's just an idea, it's just language, information, digital protocol, whatever you want to call it. So it's just this abstraction, basically, but it becomes reified and concretized by anchoring it to energy expenditure. All of a sudden, this idea of fixed supply money or inviolable private property, private property that's very hard to separate from its owner, that's just an idea that we were trying to get people to follow with the Constitution and rule of law and all these things. But now it's incentivized through the expenditure of energy by expending real world energy to create Bitcoin. It anchors the abstract world into the physical world. And so we get this strange move where Satoshi imported the integrity and the immutability of the laws of physics into the socioeconomic domain through the advent of global digital non-state cash. And that's a mouthful, but it's like, holy shit, how profound is that? You literally just bridged the unbridgeable worlds. And you also blew Descartes apart, right? There is no, I think, therefore I am. There is no bright line between thinking subject and objective world. Right? Satoshi proved that, basically, that you've anchored, money is such an interesting thing. It's subjectively chosen, right? Anyone can choose whatever their money is going to be, and then whatever that consensus point is, becomes money. But that doesn't mean we can just arbitrarily consent on anything as money. There are selection pressures. There are objective properties that make a certain asset better or worse at fulfilling the role of money. So Bitcoin kind of interestingly bridges this chasm between subject and object. And again, other things do this, right? We've talked about evolution a lot. Well, was evolution subjective or objective? Well, we mentioned the objectivity of selection pressures, right? If you're either going to get the food or you're not, if the leaves are too high on the tree, well, as a giraffe, your neck is either long enough or it's not to eat that. The longer neck giraffe is probably going to outcompete the shorter neck giraffe, right? Okay, so that's objective selection pressures. But what about mate selection? Right? Animals choose who to mate and reproduce with, so there's a subjective element. So what is it? Evolution is neither objective nor subjective, so what is it? It's this weird in-between, and I think money and Bitcoin are similar.
Oh, so many things to pull on. I'm thinking about Knut Svanholm, who says, you are the Bitcoin.
We are part of the network for sure.
I like what you said about, human society or the evolvement. It is chaotic, objectively chaotic. And I also like learning about the idea that the concept of decentralized rules or agreeing on a certain truth as a starting point for the development of, in this example, a society, a country, that existed before. And so the need for humans to have that, I think, is very clear, because the fact that human society is chaos and there are different wants and needs and different strengths and skills and whatever, the whole, the people are so diverse and different that is chaos in essence. But we need a system based on a truth. And yes, you can set it, you can put it on paper. But as you are experiencing, perhaps also on your side of the world after 250-ish years. Yeah, there are different interpretations to this original set of rules, especially the property part, right? Like we've seen that non-existent in the money sense, definitely. So if you need decentralized rules, but the rules for the technology you use to communicate with each other, to exchange value with each other, are by definition centralized, they can therefore be corrupted. You see that they are corrupted. And wouldn't that show that is a flawed system just from that is a flawed system from the start, that is eventually destined to fail?
Yeah, I think history bears that out pretty well, right? Where have we ever seen a centralized rule system persist forever? I mean,
I was thinking, Bitcoin is kind of like this portal of going from a high entropy financial system, a lot of disorder, a lot of low energy, misdirected energy, perverse incentives, to a low entropy financial system. Because if the base layer of Bitcoin is the engineered truth, it's the pure truth of the system, then that could be a base layer in order to actually, build upon. And the more economic energy is eventually stored in Bitcoin, the higher its probability of surviving if more people put their energy towards that, which is lower entropy, eventually leads to more order. And this is what I got from the My Big Toe podcast. When I was listening to it, he said, lower entropy means higher stability, higher predictability, higher potential for growth. And then I was like, wow, that sounds like Bitcoin as a base layer for a monetary system.
Yeah, well, let's see here. I think all social orders, right? So we're going to have, again, predictable relations and behaviors among people. These require people to accord themselves with a certain framework. Morality is a great example, right? Just the fact that we can generally expect not to be killed or robbed when we go outside of our house in most normal modern societies, right? That is an element of social order, that we have internalized these rules, right? These moral principles that we in general don't hurt one another or don't steal from one another. That's what allows us to interact with strangers at scale, right? Which is, by the way, a very weird thing. Animals don't do that too much. Animals stick to their little pod or their little herd or their little tribe, whatever you want to call it. They don't build global societies where we just sort of, glide by strangers. We even, purposely try to interact with strangers, right? We'll go out of our way to talk to someone, or we try to make new friends, or to meet someone at a party, or social mixers, all these things. This is where we have created systems that allow us to interact with strangers in a way that nature didn't really afford us, right? So, so I call these like points of common unity, right? We say like, don't kill, don't steal. It could be moral, could be also a little more external, like the rule of law. We follow the law of the land. You know that there's consequences if you do a certain thing. You drive in your lane, right? You'll use a blinker to go into this lane. Like these are all things that everyone's doing. And as a generalized expectation, it allows us all to flow together more seamlessly. These points of common unity are essential to community, right? You can't have community. That's where you get the word community. It's built on points of common unity. And so these are the rules that, let's say, reward productive acts and penalize destructive or non-productive acts, right? That's why we don't kill. That's why we don't steal. That's why we use our blinker. Even little things, right? Like holding the door open for someone, right? It's just kind of a general like what would you call that? Like a chivalry or a manner, a mannerism, something like that. It just helps people. It's the nice thing to do because you've already got the door open. You already went through it. Why would you let it shut in someone's face if you just, expend a little bit extra energy to hold it open so they could pass through easily, right? So that's like another just kind of generalized practice. So why do we do all that? And how does it relate to entropy? Well, nature and let's say the horizon of the future, right? The future is always coming at us.
Yes.
Nonstop. So not the one thing, but one thing we cannot do anything about. With that onrushing horizon of the future comes uncertainty, right? We never know what's going to happen next, right? We have very minimal capacity to predict into the future and almost no capacity to predict into the future once you get into complex systems, which is almost everything, right? So we are constantly facing an avalanche or a deluge of uncertainty, which you could equally call entropy, right? The entropy is just coming at us all the time. So what do we do to try and survive in that? Is like, well, we create order, right? We create culture, we create capital stocks, we accumulate goods and tools and machines and factories and all of these things that can allow us to produce more consumer goods per unit of human effort than we otherwise could. And we do all these things collaboratively.